Sergeant Daniel Murphy had been standing guard at Buckingham Palace for 12 years. At 34, he was considered one of the most disciplined and reliable guards in the Queen's Guard. Known for his unwavering focus and perfect adherence to protocol, his tall frame stood perfectly still in the iconic red tunic and bearskin hat. And tourists from around the world would pose for photos next to him, trying unsuccessfully to make him smile or break character. The rules were crystal clear and had been drilled into Daniel since his first day of training. Guards were to remain motionless, silent, and completely professional at all times while on duty. They were living symbols of British tradition and royal dignity, and nothing was supposed to break their stoic composure. Daniel had internalized these rules so completely that they had become second nature to him. On this particular Tuesday morning in July, the summer tourist season was in full swing. Hundreds of visitors gathered outside the palace gates, snapping photos and hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty. The weather was perfect, sunny and warm, with a gentle breeze that made the Union Jack flutter proudly above the palace. Daniel took his position at the main gate at precisely 10 a.m., beginning what he expected would be another routine 4-hour shift. Among the crowd of tourists, Daniel noticed a family that seemed different from the usual visitors. A middle-aged man was pushing a wheelchair occupied by a small girl who appeared to be around 8 years old. The girl was pale and thin, wearing a bright pink dress and a colorful headscarf that couldn't quite hide the fact that she had lost her hair. Despite her obvious illness, her eyes sparkled with excitement as she looked up at the palace and the guards. The family, the father, mother, and what appeared to be an older brother approached Daniel's position slowly. The little girl in the wheelchair kept pointing at him and whispering excitedly to her parents. Daniel could hear fragments of their conversation carried on the summer breeze, and he realized they were speaking with American accents. "Look, Emma, that's a real Queen's Guard," Mother said softly, her voice filled with forced cheerfulness that Daniel recognized. He had heard that tone before from parents trying to make difficult situations seem normal and happy for their children. Emma's eyes widened as she studied Daniel's uniform, taking in every detail of the red tunic, the golden buttons, and the impressive bearskin hat. She whispered something to her father, who knelt down beside her wheelchair to listen more carefully. "She wants to know if you think the guard would wave at her," the father said to his wife, loud enough for Daniel to hear. "She's been looking forward to seeing the guards ever since we planned this trip." Daniel's training told him to ignore the conversation and maintain his professional demeanor. Guards did not acknowledge individual tourists, did not break character, and certainly did not wave at children. But something about this particular family tugged at his attention in a way that felt different from the usual. Tourist interactions, the mother looked at her daughter with an expression that Daniel found deeply moving. There was love there, but also a kind of desperate hope, the look of someone trying to create perfect memories under difficult circumstances. The older brother, probably around 12, stood quietly beside the wheelchair, his face showing a maturity that seemed beyond his years. Emma continued to stare at Daniel with unwavering fascination. Unlike most children who quickly lost interest when guards didn't respond to their attempts at interaction, she seemed content simply to observe him. There was something peaceful about her gaze, as if she understood that his stillness was part of what made him special, rather than something to be disrupted. The family spent nearly 10 minutes near Daniel's position, with the father taking photos of Emma in her wheelchair with the guard in the background. The mother kept adjusting Emma's headscarf and making sure she was comfortable, while the brother helped position the wheelchair for the best photos. As Daniel stood motionless, he found himself thinking about the little girl in ways that went beyond his usual professional awareness of his surroundings. Her obvious illness, combined with her genuine excitement about seeing the palace and the guards, created an emotional response that Daniel wasn't accustomed to experiencing while on duty. Other tourists came and went, but Daniel noticed that his attention kept returning to Emma and her family. They had moved to a nearby bench where Emma could continue to observe the guards while resting in the shade. The parents were speaking in low tones, and Daniel caught occasional words that suggested they were discussing schedules and medications. The kind of practical conversations that families dealing with serious illness learned to have in public spaces during his years of service. Daniel had seen thousands of families visit the palace. Most were excited tourists enjoying a vacation, But occasionally he encountered families like this one, people for whom the visit seemed to carry deeper meaning. These were often families dealing with challenges that made simple pleasures, like sightseeing, precious and poignant. As his shift continued, Daniel found himself increasingly aware of Emma's presence. She had convinced her parents to stay near his post, and she continued to watch him with patient fascination. Unlike other children who might try to distract or tease the guards, Emma seemed to understand that she was observing something important and special. The morning sun grew warmer, and Daniel could see that Emma was beginning to look tired. Her mother was offering her water and checking her comfort, while her father consulted what appeared to be a medication schedule. Despite her obvious fatigue, Emma's gaze never left Daniel's position. Around noon, something happened that would change Daniel's understanding of duty and protocol forever. Emma raised her small hand in a tentative wave, not trying to make him break character, but simply offering a gesture of friendship and recognition. Her smile was radiant despite her pale complexion, and her eyes held a hope that seemed to transcend her physical condition in that moment. Daniel faced a choice that would test everything he believed about service, duty, and the true meaning of representing the crown. Daniel felt his heart skip a beat as Emma's small hand remained raised in that gentle wave. Her smile was so pure and hopeful that it seemed to cut through 12 years of rigid training and protocol, a moment that felt like an eternity. Daniel stood frozen between his duty as a queen's guard and his instinct as a human being who recognized a child's simple request for acknowledgement. The rules were absolute. Guards did not break character. They did not acknowledge individual tourists. They represented centuries of tradition and royal dignity that was larger than any personal moment or emotional response. Daniel had seen guards disciplined and even dismissed for far smaller breaches of protocol than what Emma was innocently requesting. But as he looked at this little girl, her thin frame in the wheelchair, her brave smile, despite obvious illness, her patient hope that he might somehow recognize her presence, Daniel felt something shift inside him. This wasn't about breaking rules for the sake of rebellion or showing off for tourists. This was about recognizing a moment of pure human connection that transcended protocol. Emma's parents had noticed her wave and were gently trying to explain that the guards couldn't respond. "Sweetheart, remember what we talked about?" her mother said softly. "The guards have to stay very still and quiet. It's their job." "I know, Mommy," Emma replied. But she didn't lower her hand. "I just want him to know I think he's doing a good job." Those words hit Daniel like a physical blow. This child, dealing with what was obviously a serious illness, far from her home, in America, was thinking about encouraging him. She wasn't trying to get attention or create a spectacle. She genuinely wanted to express appreciation for his service. Daniel's mind raced through the possible consequences of breaking protocol. He could face disciplinary action, lose his position, or bring shame to his unit. His commanding officers had made it clear that the reputation of the Queen's Guard depended on every individual guard maintaining perfect discipline at all times. But he also thought about why he had become a guard in the first place. It wasn't just about following rules or looking impressive in a uniform. It was about serving the crown and, by extension, serving the people of Britain and the Commonwealth. Wasn't this little girl, in her own way, one of the people he had sworn to serve and protect? The crowd around Emma's family had grown larger, with other tourists noticing the interaction and waiting to see what would happen. Some were taking photos and videos, documenting what they sensed might be an unusual moment. Daniel was acutely aware that whatever he did next would likely be recorded and possibly shared widely. Emma's father knelt beside her wheelchair and spoke gently. "Emma, honey, maybe we should move along and let the guard do his job. You've been watching him for a long time, and you must be getting tired. Can we stay just a little longer, Daddy?" Nima asked, her voice showing the first signs of fatigue. "I want to make sure he knows I see him." The simple profundity of her words, "Want to make sure he knows I see him," struck Daniel as one of the most moving things he had ever heard. In 12 years of standing guard, surrounded by crowds of people taking photos and treating him like a tourist attraction, no one had ever expressed the desire to simply acknowledge his humanity. Daniel noticed that Emma's older brother was watching. the interaction with intense interest. The boy seemed to understand better than the adults that this moment meant something special to his sister. He placed a protective hand on Emma's shoulder, supporting her desire to stay and continue her patient vigil. Other guards at nearby posts had noticed the unusual length of time this family was spending in one location. Daniel could sense his colleagues' awareness of the situation, though their own discipline prevented them from turning to look directly. He knew they were wondering how he would handle this test of protocol. The summer heat was beginning to affect Emma visibly. Her mother was using a small fan to keep her cool, and her father was offering frequent sips of water. Despite her obvious discomfort, Emma's focus remained fixed on Daniel. Her small hand still raised in that hopeful wave. Daniel realized that his moment of decision had arrived. He could maintain perfect protocol and ignore Emma's gesture, which would likely cause disappointment but preserve his career and reputation. Or he could acknowledge this brave little girl's simple request for human connection, knowing that it might have serious professional consequences. As he wrestled with this decision, Daniel noticed something that made his choice suddenly clear. Tears had begun to form in Emma's eyes, not tears of sadness or frustration, but tears of hope and determination. She was putting every ounce of her limited energy into this moment, trying to connect with someone who represented something special and important to her. Daniel thought about the oath he had taken when he became a Queen's Guard. He had sworn to serve with honor, courage, and dedication. In this moment, he realized that true honor might require breaking the rules that had been designed to protect the institution he served. Sometimes courage meant doing what was right rather than what was expected. The crowd had grown silent, sensing that something significant was happening. Emma's parents had stopped trying to redirect her attention, perhaps recognizing that this moment was too important to their daughter to interrupt. Other tourists were holding their cameras ready, but with a respectful distance that suggested they understood they were witnessing something special. Daniel made his decision. Very slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to move his right hand. The movement was so subtle that only those watching closely would notice, but it was unmistakably deliberate. He was breaking 12 years of perfect protocol, risking his career and reputation, to acknowledge one little girl's brave attempt at human connection. As his hand moved into a gentle wave, it's barely more than a slight movement of his fingers. Emma's face transformed with joy and wonder. Tears in her eyes became tears of happiness, and her smile became radiant with the knowledge that she had been seen and acknowledged by someone she admired. The moment Daniel's hand moved in that gentle wave, the entire atmosphere around the palace gates seemed to shift. Emma's face lit up with such pure joy that several tourists nearby began wiping away tears. Her mother gasped softly and covered her mouth with her hands, while her father's eyes filled with emotion as he witnessed his daughter's happiness. He waved at Lee. Emma whispered excitedly to her family, her voice filled with wonder. "Oh, the guard actually waved at me." The crowd that had gathered around the family began to applaud softly, understanding instinctively that they had witnessed something extraordinary. People were taking photos and recording videos, but the atmosphere was respectful rather than sensational. Even strangers seemed to recognize that this was a moment of genuine human connection that transcended the usual tourist experience. Daniel immediately returned to his rigid stance, but something fundamental had changed. The other guards at nearby posts had certainly noticed what had happened, though their own discipline prevented them from reacting visibly. Daniel knew that word of his breach of protocol would likely reach his commanding officers within hours, if not sooner. But as he stood there, feeling the weight of what he had just done, Daniel experienced something unexpected, or fear about the consequences. He felt a deep sense of peace and rightness about his decision. For the first time in his 12 years of service, he had connected the formal duties of his position with the deeper purpose of serving people who needed acknowledgement and care. Emma's family spent several more minutes near Daniel's post, with Emma continuing to beam with happiness as she told anyone who would listen about her interaction with the guard. Her energy seemed to have returned, and the pallor in her cheeks had been replaced by a healthy flush of excitement. "This is the best day of my whole trip," Emma announced to her parents. The guard saw me and waved back. Means he knows I'm here. Her simple interpretation of the moment, that being acknowledged meant being truly seen and recognized, struck Daniel as profoundly wise. In a world where children like Emma often felt invisible because of their illness or limitations, his small gesture had affirmed her presence and worth in a way that would probably stay with her forever. Other tourists began approaching Emma's family, drawn by the obvious joy and emotion of the moment. Several people shared their own stories of visiting the palace, and an elderly British woman told Emma that she had never seen a guard break protocol in 40 years of living in London. "You must be very special, dear," the woman said gently. "Guard did something quite extraordinary for you." Emma nodded seriously, understanding that she had been part of something unusual and important. "I think he's the best guard in the whole palace," she declared, with the confidence that only children possess. As the afternoon progressed, Daniel noticed that news of the incident was spreading beyond the immediate crowd. People were pointing him out to their friends. He could see tourists showing photos and videos on their phones to others who had missed the moment. Social media posts were likely already beginning to circulate, though Daniel had no way of knowing how widely the story would spread. Around 2 p.m., Daniel's shift was scheduled to end, but he found himself reluctant to leave his post. Emma and Day, her family, were still nearby, and he could see that she was growing tired but fighting to stay alert. Her parents were clearly torn between wanting to let her continue enjoying the experience and needing to attend to her medical needs. When Daniel's replacement arrived to take over the post, the transition felt more significant than usual. Sergeant Williams, who had been a guard for 8 years, approached with his usual professional demeanor, but Daniel could see questions in his eyes about what had happened during the shift. "Anything unusual to report, Murphy?" Williams asked. In the formal tone used for shift changes, Daniel paused for a moment, considering how to respond. "Nothing that couldn't be handled appropriately, sir," he said finally, using language that acknowledged something had happened without providing details that might complicate Williams' own shift as Daniel prepared to leave his post. He took one final look at Emma and her family. The little girl was resting in her wheelchair, but her eyes were still bright with the memory of her special moment. When she noticed him looking in her direction, she gave him another small wave, not expecting a response this time, but simply. As a gesture of goodbye and gratitude, Daniel walked away from his post with mixed emotions. I felt pride in what he had done, but also anxiety about the consequences he might face. Breaking protocol was a serious matter in the Queen's Guard, and he had no idea how his commanding officers would react when they learned about the incident. In the changing room, Daniel removed his ceremonial uniform with more care than usual, aware that he might not have the privilege of wearing it much longer. His actions had been witnessed by dozens of people and likely recorded by multiple cameras. There would be no hiding what he had done, or pretending it hadn't happened. But as he folded his red tunic and placed his bearskin hat in its storage box, Daniel realized that he had no regrets about his decision. Yes, he had broken protocol, but he had done so for the right reasons. He had chosen compassion over rules, human connection over institutional tradition, and the needs of a sick child over his own career security. Other guards in the changing room were unusually quiet, suggesting that word of the incident had already spread through the ranks. Daniel could feel their curious glances, but no one asked direct questions about what had happened. The culture of the Queen's Guard included both strict discipline and loyalty to fellow guards, creating a complex dynamic when someone faced potential disciplinary action. As Daniel left the palace that evening, he noticed that several news vans had gathered outside the gates. Reporters were interviewing tourists who had witnessed the incident, and photographers were taking pictures of the location where it had occurred. The story was clearly growing beyond a simple social media moment. Daniel realized that his decision to wave at Emma had set in motion a chain of events that would likely have consequences far beyond what he had anticipated. But as he walked home through the London streets, he found himself thinking not about potential punishments or media attention, but about the look of joy on a little girl's face when she realized that someone had truly seen her. By the next morning, Daniel's simple wave to Emma had become an international news story. Videos of the moment had been shared millions of times across social media platforms, with hashtags like #RoyalGuardCompassion and hashtag EMM's wave trending worldwide. News outlets from America to Australia were covering the story. Daniel's face was appearing on television screens around the globe. Daniel woke to dozens of missed calls and text messages from friends, family members, and reporters who had somehow obtained his contact information. His phone had been buzzing constantly since 5 a.m., with notifications from social media platforms where he barely maintained accounts. The attention was overwhelming and completely outside his experience as someone who had spent his career trying to be invisible and professional. The morning newspapers were filled with photos of the moment, with headlines like "Guards, Heart Melts Protocol," and "Royal Compassion Breaks All Rules." Editorial writers were praising Daniel's humanity, while debating whether his actions were appropriate or damaging to royal traditions. The story had sparked discussions about the balance between institutional dignity and human kindness. At 8 a.m., Daniel received a call that he had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. Major Richardson, his commanding officer, requested his immediate presence at the palace for what was described as an urgent disciplinary consultation. Daniel had served under Richardson for 6 years and respected him greatly, but he knew that the major was a strict adherent to protocol who would not take kindly to such a public breach of regulations. As Daniel walked to the palace that morning, he noticed that the media presence outside the gates had intensified overnight. Reporters and camera crews were stationed at every entrance, and tourists were gathering in larger numbers than usual. Hoping to witness any follow-up to the previous day's events, Daniel managed to enter through a service entrance to avoid the media attention. Major Richardson's office reflected the man's personality: precise, orderly, and dominated by photographs and memorabilia from decades of military service. The major was sitting behind his desk reviewing a thick file when Daniel entered and saluted according to protocol. Sergeant Murphy Richardson began, his voice serious but not hostile. "I think you know why you're here. Your actions yesterday have created what can only be described as an international incident. I have reporters calling from 6 different countries, social media posts with millions of views, and questions from senior palace officials about the conduct of my guards." Daniel stood at attention and replied formally, "Yes, sir, I understand the seriousness of my breach of protocol." Richardson studied Daniel for a long moment before continuing. "What I need to understand, Sergeant, is why you chose to risk your career and the reputation of this unit for a moment with a tourist child. Help me understand what you were thinking." For the first time since entering the office, Daniel relaxed slightly and spoke from his heart rather than from military protocol. "Sir, I saw a little girl who was clearly very ill, who had traveled thousands of miles to see the guards, who simply wanted to be acknowledged as a human being. In that moment, it felt like the compassionate thing to do was more important than the rule about remaining motionless." Richardson leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Sergeant, in 28 years of military service, I have seen the consequences of both rigid adherence to rules and of well-intentioned rule-breaking. Both can have serious implications." Daniel waited for his commanding officer to continue, unsure whether he was about to be dismissed from service or reprimanded and given another chance. "However," Richardson continued, "I have also spent the last 12 hours reviewing the public response to your actions, and I have received some very interesting communications that I want to share with you." The major opened his file and pulled out several documents. "I have received calls from the American ambassador, thanking the palace for the kindness shown to an American family. I have received a letter from Emma's parents, describing their daughter's illness and explaining how much your gesture meant to their family. And most significantly, I've received guidance from senior palace officials about how to handle this situation." Daniel felt his heart racing as he waited to learn his fate. The mention of palace officials suggested that his actions had been noticed at the highest levels of the royal household, which could mean either very good news or very bad news for his career. Richardson pulled out what appeared to be an official letter bearing royal letterhead. "Sergeant Murphy, I have been instructed to inform you that your actions yesterday, while technically a breach of protocol, have been viewed by senior palace officials as an exemplary demonstration of the values that the royal family wishes to represent." Daniel could hardly believe what he was hearing. Instead of punishment, it seemed that his decision to break protocol was being praised by the very institution he had thought he was betraying. Furthermore, Richardson continued, I have been asked to commend you officially for your judgment. In recognizing that human compassion should sometimes take precedence over rigid adherence to rules, your actions have generated positive international attention for the royal family and have demonstrated the kind of caring leadership that the monarchy wants to embody. The relief Daniel felt was overwhelming, but Richardson wasn't finished with his briefing. However, Sergeant, this does not mean that protocol breaches will be tolerated in the future. Nor does it mean that your actions yesterday don't require careful consideration of their implications. You have been assigned to work with our public relations team to help manage the media attention this incident has generated. Daniel was surprised by this assignment, which was far outside his normal duties as a guard. Richardson explained that the palace had decided to use the positive attention from Daniel's actions to highlight their support for children's charities and their commitment to accessible public service. Your story has touched people around the world, Sergeant, and the royal family wants to build on that positive response in meaningful ways. You'll be working with our charitable organizations team to develop initiatives that reflect the values you demonstrated yesterday. As Daniel left Richardson's office, he felt a mixture of relief, pride, and bewilderment. His career had not only survived his breach of protocol, it had apparently been enhanced by it. But more importantly, he learned that his simple gesture of kindness had initiated conversations about compassion and service at the highest levels of the institution he served. The rest of the day was filled with meetings with palace communications, staff, charity, coordinators, public relations specialists who were working to channel the international attention into positive outcomes. Daniel found himself at the center of discussions about how the royal family could better connect with people facing serious challenges, and how royal traditions could evolve to better reflect contemporary values of empathy and inclusion. By evening, Daniel realized that his wave to Emma had accomplished something he never could have anticipated. It had not only brought joy to one sick little girl, but had started a conversation about the role of compassion in public service that was reaching millions of people around the world. The international response to Daniel's gesture continued to grow throughout the week, but it was the personal messages that affected him most deeply. Letters and emails poured in from parents of sick children, medical professionals, military, families, and people from all walks of life who had been moved by the simple act of compassion they had witnessed. One letter that particularly touched Daniel came from a children's hospital in Manchester. The staff wrote that they had shown the video of his interaction with Emma to young patients who were struggling with their own illnesses. The children had been inspired by Emma's courage and by Daniel's recognition of her worth, and several had requested to meet guards or other officials who might acknowledge their own battles with serious medical conditions. Another moving message came from a military family in Scotland whose daughter had been born with multiple disabilities. They wrote that seeing a uniformed service member break protocol to show kindness to a child had given them hope that their daughter would be accepted and valued by the institutions and traditions they held dear. Perhaps the most significant response came from Emma's family themselves. Her parents had written a detailed letter explaining that Emma had been battling leukemia for 2 years, and that the trip to London had been planned as a possible final adventure if her latest treatment didn't succeed. Daniel's wave had become the highlight not just of their vacation, but of Emma's entire struggle with illness. Emma talks about her guard friend every day, her mother had written. She tells everyone she meets about the special moment when someone in uniform acknowledged her as a person worth noticing. For a child who often feels invisible because of her illness, your simple gesture has given her a sense of dignity and importance that we could never have imagined. The letter went on to explain that Emma's latest medical tests had shown promising signs of improvement, and that her doctors attributed part of her positive progress to her improved spirits and renewed hope. While Daniel knew that a single wave couldn't cure cancer, he was moved by the idea that his moment of compassion might have contributed to a child's healing process. The palace communications team had been working with Daniel to coordinate responses to the overwhelming media interest in his story. They had arranged for him to participate in carefully selected interviews and public appearances that would highlight the charitable work of the royal family while maintaining the dignity of his position as a guard. One of the most meaningful opportunities came when Daniel was invited to visit the children's hospital that had first written to him. Accompanied by a representative from the royal family's charitable foundation, Daniel spent an afternoon meeting young patients and their families, learning about their challenges and their hopes. The visit was profoundly moving for Daniel, who had never fully understood how much his uniform and position meant to people facing difficult circumstances. Children who were too weak to leave their beds lit up when he entered their rooms in his dress uniform. Parents who had been maintaining brave facades for months broke down in tears when Daniel took time to really listen to their stories and acknowledge their struggles. During the hospital visit, Daniel met a 7-year-old boy named James, who had been born with a rare genetic condition that required constant medical care. James had seen the video of Daniel's interaction with Emma, and had asked repeatedly if he could meet the nice guard who waves at sick kids. When Daniel entered James's room, the little boy's face showed the same wonder and excitement that Emma had displayed outside the palace. "Are you the guard who broke the rules to be nice?" James asked, with the directness that only children possess. Daniel knelt beside James's bed and spoke gently. "I'm the guard who decided that being kind was more important than following every rule perfectly. Sometimes being a good person means making difficult choices." James nodded seriously and then asked, "Do you think other people in uniforms would be nice to sick kids too?" The question struck Daniel as profoundly important. His actions had apparently opened conversations not just about royal protocol, but about how all people in positions of authority and symbolic importance could better serve those who looked up to them. "I think most people want to be kind, James," Daniel replied. "Sometimes they just need someone to show them that it's okay to choose compassion over rules when the situation calls for it." The media coverage of Daniel's hospital visit generated another wave of positive attention. But more importantly, it inspired similar acts of compassion from other service members, police officers, and public officials who had been moved by his example. Police departments began sharing stories of officers who had gone beyond their official duties to help children and families in crisis. Fire departments posted videos of firefighters taking extra time to interact with young admirers. Military units shared examples of service members who had broken minor protocols to provide comfort or encouragement to civilians. Daniel realized that his simple wave to Emma had accidentally started a movement that was much larger than anything he had intended. People in uniforms and positions of authority around the world were being inspired to prioritize human connection over rigid adherence to rules. When appropriate situations arose, the royal family's charitable foundation decided to formalize this movement by creating a new initiative called Service with Heart, which would train public servants, military personnel, and other uniformed professionals in recognizing opportunities to provide compassion while maintaining their official responsibilities. Daniel was asked to help develop the training program. Sharing his experience and the lessons he had learned from his interaction with Emma, the role gave him a sense of purpose that went far beyond his duties as a guard, allowing him to influence how future generations of service members would balance protocol with humanity. As he worked with educators, psychologists, and other experts to create materials for the program, Daniel reflected on how much his life had changed since that moment when he decided to wave at a little girl in a wheelchair. He had discovered that true service meant more than just following orders or maintaining traditions. It meant recognizing when those traditions could be enhanced by genuine human compassion. The program would eventually be implemented in multiple countries, training thousands of public servants in the art of compassionate leadership while maintaining professional standards. Daniel's split-second decision to acknowledge Emma's wave had evolved into a systematic approach to making institutions more responsive to human needs. 6 months after his fateful wave to Emma, Daniel received news that would bring his story full circle in the most beautiful way possible. Emma's parents had written to inform him that their daughter's cancer was in complete remission, and that her doctors had declared her treatment successful. Even more exciting, the family was planning to return to London to celebrate Emma's recovery, and they had requested permission to visit Daniel at the palace. The reunion was arranged as a private, ceremony in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms, away from the media attention that still occasionally surrounded Daniel's story. When Emma entered the room, Daniel was amazed by the transformation. Her hair had grown back in soft curls, her cheeks were full and rosy, and her eyes sparkled with the energy of a healthy child. "You're my guard friend," Emma exclaimed when she saw Daniel, now wearing his dress uniform for the special occasion. "I told everyone about you, and now I'm all better and I came back to see you again." The simple joy in her voice brought tears to Daniel's eyes as he realized how much this moment meant to both of them. Emma represented not just his decision to choose compassion over protocol, but the positive outcomes that could flow from such choices. Emma's parents were equally emotional as they thanked Daniel for the role his gesture had played in their daughter's recovery. The doctors say that her positive attitude and renewed hope were significant factors in how well she responded to treatment, Emma's father explained. "Your wave gave her something to hold on to during the darkest moments of her illness." Their visit, Emma presented Daniel with a drawing she had made showing the two of them outside the palace gates. In her child's artistic style, Daniel appeared impossibly tall in his red uniform. While she sat in her wheelchair with a huge smile, both of them waving at each other, at the bottom of the drawing, she had written in careful letters, "Thank you for seeing me." The phrase "thank you for seeing me" had become a central theme in the Service with Heart program that Daniel had helped develop. It represented the fundamental human need for acknowledgement and recognition, especially among people who felt marginalized or invisible because of illness, disability, or other challenges. The program had now been implemented in 12 countries, training over 50,000 public servants in techniques for providing compassionate service. While maintaining professional standards, Daniel had traveled extensively as a trainer and speaker, sharing Emma's story and the lessons it had taught him about the power of simple, human gestures. One of the most rewarding aspects of the program was hearing stories from other service members who had been inspired to make their own compassionate choices. Police officers wrote about taking extra time with frightened children during difficult situations. Firefighters shared stories of providing comfort to families who had lost their homes. Military personnel described moments when they had chosen to show kindness to civilians in ways that went beyond their official duties. Each story reinforced Daniel's belief that his wave to Emma had tapped into something universal, the desire for people in positions of authority to connect with those they served on a human level, while still maintaining the professionalism and dignity that their roles required. 6 months after his fateful wave to Emma, Daniel received news that would bring his story full circle in the most beautiful way possible. Emma's parents had written to inform him that their daughter's cancer was in complete remission, and that her doctors had declared her treatment successful. Even more exciting, the family was planning to return to London to celebrate Emma's recovery, and they had requested permission to visit Daniel at the palace. The reunion was arranged as a private ceremony in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms, away from the media attention that still occasionally surrounded Daniel's story. When Emma entered the room, Daniel was amazed by the transformation. Her hair had grown back in soft curls, her cheeks were full and rosy, and her eyes sparkled with the energy of a healthy child. "You're my guard friend," Emma exclaimed when she saw Daniel, now wearing his dress uniform for the special occasion. "I told everyone about you, and now I'm all better and I came back to see you again." The simple joy in her voice brought tears to Daniel's eyes as he realized how much this moment meant to both of them. Emma represented not just his decision to choose compassion over protocol, but the positive outcomes that could flow from such choices. Emma's parents were equally emotional as they thanked Daniel for the role his gesture had played in their daughter's recovery. The doctors say that her positive attitude and renewed hope were significant factors in how well she responded to treatment, Emma's father explained. "Your wave gave her something to hold on to during the darkest moments of her illness." Their visit, Emma presented Daniel with a drawing she had made showing the two of them outside the palace gates. In her child's artistic style, Daniel appeared impossibly tall in his red uniform. While she sat in her wheelchair with a huge smile, both of them waving at each other, at the bottom of the drawing, she had written in careful letters, "Thank you for seeing me." The phrase "thank you for seeing me" had become a central theme in the Service with Heart program that Daniel had helped develop. It represented the fundamental human need for acknowledgement and recognition, especially among people who felt marginalized or invisible because of illness, disability, or other challenges. The program had now been implemented in 12 countries, training over 50,000 public servants in techniques for providing compassionate service. While maintaining professional standards, Daniel had traveled extensively as a trainer and speaker, sharing Emma's story and the lessons it had taught him about the power of simple, human gestures. One of the most rewarding aspects of the program was hearing stories from other service members who had been inspired to make their own compassionate choices. Police officers wrote about taking extra time with frightened children during difficult situations. Firefighters shared stories of providing comfort to families who had lost their homes. Military personnel described moments when they had chosen to show kindness to civilians in ways that went beyond their official duties. Each story reinforced Daniel's belief that his wave to Emma had tapped into something universal, the desire for people in positions of authority to connect with those they served on a human level, while still maintaining the professionalism and dignity that their roles required. The royal family had also embraced the lessons from Daniel's experience, incorporating more opportunities for informal interaction with the public into their official duties. Members of the royal family began spending more unscheduled time during public appearances to connect with individuals who might benefit from personal acknowledgement, especially children and people facing health challenges. As Daniel's story spread around the world, it had inspired similar programs in other institutions beyond military and public service organizations. Hospitals began training their staff to provide more personal attention to patients. Schools developed programs to help teachers recognize and acknowledge students who might feel invisible or overlooked. Even corporations started implementing customer service training based on the principles Daniel had demonstrated. The most touching validation of Daniel's decision came during a ceremony at Buckingham Palace, where he was formally recognized for his service innovations. As he stood in the same uniform he had worn on that July day when he first saw Emma, Daniel reflected on how much his understanding of duty and service had evolved. True service, Daniel said during his acceptance speech, isn't just about following rules or maintaining traditions. It's about recognizing that the people we serve are human beings who need to be seen, acknowledged, and treated with compassion. Sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply let someone know that they matter. Emma and her family were present for the ceremony, and when Daniel finished his speech, she stood up from her seat in the audience and gave him the same gentle wave she had offered 6 months earlier. This time, Daniel didn't hesitate to wave back, and the entire audience joined in spontaneous applause for both the little girl, who had asked to be seen, and the guard who had chosen to see her. The video of Daniel's speech and Emma's wave went viral once again, but this time the focus was on celebration rather than surprise. People around the world shared the video with messages. It's about their own experiences of feeling invisible and their gratitude for the times when someone in authority had chosen to acknowledge their humanity. Years later, Daniel would continue to serve as a Queen's Guard, while also working as an international advocate for compassionate public service. Emma would grow up to become a pediatric nurse, inspired by the medical professionals who had saved her life and the guard who had shown her that uniform meant service to others. Their story became more than just a moment of protocol being broken. It became a testament to the power of human connection, the importance of compassion in public service, and the extraordinary impact that simple acts of kindness can have when they come from the heart. The moment when a royal guard broke protocol for a little girl had indeed brought emotional reactions worldwide. But more importantly, it had changed how thousands of people in positions of authority understood their responsibility to serve with both professionalism and humanity. Daniel's wave to Emma had become a symbol of the truth that the greatest traditions are those that evolve to better serve the people they were created to protect and honor. In the end, Daniel had discovered that breaking protocol wasn't a betrayal of his duty, it was the fulfillment of it. By choosing to see Emma as a person worthy of acknowledgement, he had demonstrated the highest ideals of service to the crown and to the people that the crown represented. His story would continue to inspire future generations of public servants to remember that behind every uniform, every rule, and every tradition should be a heart ready to recognize and respond to basic human dignity.